Chapter 3.48 How Gargantua showeth that the children ought not to marry, without the special knowledge and advice of their fathers and mothers. No sooner had Pantagruel entered in at the door of the great hall of the castle, than that he encountered full butt with the good honest Gargantua coming forth from the council board, unto whom he made a succinct and summary narrative of what had passed and occurred, worthy of his observation in his travels abroad, since their last interview. Then, acquainting him with the design he had in hand, besought him that it might stand with his good will and pleasure to grant him leave to prosecute and go through stitch with the enterprise which he had undertaken. The good man Gargantua, having in one hand 2 great bundles of petitions endorsed and answered, and in the other some remembrancing notes and bills, to put him in mind of such other requests of supplicants, which, albeit presented, had nevertheless been neither read nor heard, he gave both to Ulrich Gallet, his ancient and faithful master of requests. Then drew aside Pantagruel, and with a countenance more serene and jovial than customary, spoke to him thus. I praise God, and have great reason so to do, my most dear son, that he hath been pleased to entertain in you a constant inclination to virtuous actions. I am well content that the voyage which you have motioned to me be by you accomplished, but withal I could wish you would have a mind and desire to marry, for that I see you are of competent years. Panurge in the meanwhile was in a readiness of preparing and providing for remedies, salves, and cures against all such lets, obstacles, and impediments as he could in the height of his fancy conceive might by Gargantua be cast in the way of their itinerary design. Is it your pleasure, most dear father, that you speak? Answered Pantagruel. For my part, I have not yet thought upon it. In all this affair, I wholly submit and rest in your good liking and paternal authority. For I shall rather pray unto God that he would throw me down stark dead at your feet, in your pleasure, than that against your pleasure I should be found married alive. I never yet heard that by any law, whether sacred or profane, yea, amongst the rudest and most barbarous nations in the world, it was allowed and approved of that children may be suffered and tolerated to marry at their own good will and pleasure, without the knowledge, advice, or consent asked, and had thereto of their fathers, mothers, and nearest kindred. All legislators, everywhere upon the face of the whole earth, have taken away and removed this licentious liberty from children, and totally reserved it to the discretion of the parents. My dearly beloved son, quoth Gargantua, I believe you, and from my heart thank God for having endowed you with the grace of having both a perfect notice of and entire liking to laudable and praiseworthy things, and that through the windows of your exterior senses he hath vouchsafed to transmit unto the interior faculties of your mind nothing but what is good and virtuous. For in my time there hath been found on the continent a certain country, wherein are I know not what kind of Pastophorian mole-catching priests, who, albeit averse from engaging their proper persons into a matrimonial duty, like the pontifical flamens of Cybele in Phrygia, as if they were capons, and not cocks full of lasciviousness, salacity, and wantonness, who yet have, nevertheless, in the matter of conjugal affairs, taken upon them to prescribe laws and ordinances to married folks, cannot goodly determine what I should most abhor, detest, loathe, and abominate, whether the tyrannical presumption of those dreaded sacerdotal mole-catchers, who, not being willing to contain and coop up themselves within the grates and trellises of their own mysterious temples, do deal in, meddle with, obtrude upon, and thrust their sickles into harvests of secular businesses quite contrary and diametrically opposite to the quality, state, and condition of their callings, professions, and vocations. Or the superstitious stupidity and senseless scrupulousness of married folks who have yielded obedience, and submitted their bodies, fortunes, and estates to the discretion and authority of such odious, perverse, barbarous, and unreasonable laws. Nor do they see that which is clearer than the light and splendor of the morning star, how all these nuptial and connubial sanctions, statutes, and ordinances have been decreed, made, and instituted for the sole benefit, profit, and advantage of the flaminal mists and mysterious flamens, and nothing at all for the good, utility, or emolument of the silly hoodwinked married people, which administereth unto others a sufficient cause for rendering these churchmen suspicious of iniquity, and of an unjust and fraudulent manner of dealing, no more to be connived at nor countenanced, after that it be well weighed in the scales of reason, than if with a reciprocal temerity the laics, by way of compensation, would impose laws to be followed and observed by those mists and flamens, how they should behave themselves in the making and performance of their rites and ceremonies, and after what manner they ought to proceed in the offering up and immolating of their various oblations, victims, and sacrifices, seeing that, besides the decimation and tithe-hailing of their goods, they cut off and take parings, shreddings, and clippings of the gain proceeding from the labor of their hands and sweat of their brows, therewith to entertain themselves the better. Upon which consideration, in my opinion, their injunctions and commands would not prove so pernicious and impertinent as those of the ecclesiastic power, unto which they had tendered their blind obedience. For, as you have very well said, there is no place in the world where, legally, a license is granted to the children to marry without the advice and consent of their parents and kindred. Nevertheless, by those wicked laws and mole-catching customs, whereat there is a little hinted in what I have already spoken to you, there is no scurvy, measly, leprous, or pocky ruffian, pander, knave, rogue, skellum, robber, or thief, pilloried, whipped, and burn-marked in his own country for his crimes and felonies, who may not violently snatch away and ravish what maid soever he had a mind to pitch upon, how noble, how fair, how rich, honest, and chaste soever she be. And that out of the house of her own father, in his own presence, from the bosom of her mother, and in the sight and despite of her friends and kindred looking on a so woeful spectacle, provided that the rascal villain be so cunning as to associate unto himself some mystical flamen, who, according to the covenant made betwixt them two, shall be in hope some day to participate of the prey. Could the Goths, the Scythes, or Massagetes do a worse or more cruel act to any of the inhabitants of a hostile city, when, after the loss of many of their most considerable commanders, the expense of a great deal of money, and a long siege, they shall have stormed and taken it by a violent and impetuous assault? May not these fathers and mothers, think you, be sorrowful and heavy-hearted when they see an unknown fellow, a vagabond stranger, a barbarous lout, a rude cur, rotten, fleshless, putrefied, scraggy, boily, botchy, poor, a forlorn caitiff and miserable sneak, by an open rapt snatch away before their own eyes their so fair, delicate, neat, well-behaviored, richly provided for and healthful daughters, on whose breeding and education they had spared no cost nor charges, by bringing them up in an honest discipline, to all the honorable and virtuous employments becoming one of their sex descended of a noble parentage, hoping by those commendable and industrious means, in an opportune and convenient time, to bestow them on the worthy sons of their well-deserving neighbors and ancient friends, who had nourished, entertained, taught, instructed, and schooled their children with the same care and solicitude, to make them matches fit to attain to the felicity of a so happy marriage, that from them might issue an offspring and progeny no less heirs to the laudable endowments and exquisite qualifications of their parents, whom they every way resemble, than to their personal and real estates, movables, and inheritances. How doleful, triste, and plangerous would such a sight and pageantry prove unto them! You shall not need to think that the colocramation of the Romans and their confederates at the decease of Germanicus Drusus was comparable to this lamentation of theirs. Neither would I have you to believe that the discomfort and anxiety of the Lacedaemonians, when the Greek Helen, by the perfidiousness of the adulterous Trojan, Paris, was privily stolen away out of their country, was greater or more pitiful than this ruthful and deplorable collugency of theirs. You may very well imagine that Ceres at the ravishment of her daughter Proserpina was not more attristed, sad, nor mournful than they. Trust me, and your own reason, that the loss of Osiris was not so regrettable to Isis, nor did Venus so deplore the death of Adonis, nor yet did Hercules so bewail the straying of Hylas, nor was the rapt of Polyxena more throbbingly resented and condoled by Priamus and Hecuba, than this aforesaid accident would be sympathetically bemoaned, grievous, ruthful, and anxious to the woefully desolate and disconsolate parents. Notwithstanding all this, the greater part of so vilely abused parents are so timorous and afraid of devils and hobgoblins, and so deeply plunged in superstition, that they dare not gainsay nor contradict, much less oppose and resist those unnatural and impious actions, when the mole-catcher hath been present at the perpetrating of the fact, and a party contractor and covenanter in that detestable bargain. What do they do then? They wretchedly stay at their own miserable homes, destitute of their well-beloved daughters, the fathers cursing the days and the hours wherein they were married, and the mothers howling and crying that it was not their fortune to have brought forth abortive issues when they happened to be delivered of such unfortunate girls. And in this pitiful plight spend at best the remainder of their time with tears and weeping for those their children, of and from whom they expected, and, with good reason, should have obtained and reaped. In these latter days of theirs, joy and comfort. Other parents there have been, so impatient of that affront and indignity put upon them and their families, that, transported with the extremity of passion, in a mad and frantic mood, through the vehemency of a grievous fury and raging sorrow, have drowned, hanged, killed, and otherwise put violent hands on themselves. Others, again, of that parental relation have, upon the reception of the like injury, been of a more magnanimous and heroic spirit, who, in imitation and at the example of the children of Jacob revenging upon the Sychemites the rapt of their sister Dinah, having found the rascally ruffian in the association of his mystical mole-catcher, closely and in hugger-mugger conferring, parleying, and coming with their daughters, for the suborning, corrupting, depraving, perverting, and enticing these innocent, unexperienced maids unto filthy lewdnesses, have, without any further advisement on the matter, cut them instantly into pieces, and thereupon forthwith thrown out upon the fields their so dismembered bodies, to serve for food unto the wolves and ravens. Upon the chivalrous, bold, and courageous achievement of a so valiant, stout, and manlike act, the other mole-catching simists have been so highly incensed, and have so chafed, fretted, and fumed thereat, that, bills of complaint and accusations having been in a most odious and detestable manner put in before the competent judges, the arm of secular authority hath with much importunity and impetuosity been by them implored and required. They proudly contending that the servants of God would become contemptible if exemplary punishment were not speedily taken upon the persons of the perpetrators of such an enormous, horrid, sacrilegious, crying, heinous, and execrable crime. Yet neither by natural equity, by the law of nations, nor by any imperial law whatsoever, hath there been found so much as one rubric, paragraph, point, or tittle, by the which any kind of chastisement or correction hath been adjudged due to be inflicted upon any for their delinquency in that kind. Reason opposeth, and nature is repugnant. For there is no virtuous man in the world who both naturally and with good reason will not be more hugely troubled in mind, hearing of the news of the rapt, disgrace, ignominy, and dishonor of his daughter, than of her death. Now any man, finding in hot blood one who with a forethought felony hath murdered his daughter, may, without tying himself to the formalities and circumstances of a legal proceeding, kill him on a sudden and out of hand, without incurring any hazard of being attainted and apprehended by the officers of justice for so doing. What wonder is it then? Or how little strange should it appear to any rational man, if a lecherous rogue, together with his mole-catching abettor, be entrapped in the flagrant act of suborning his daughter, and stealing her out of his house, though herself consent thereto, that the father in such a case of stain and infamy by them brought upon his family, should put them both to a shameful death, and cast their carcasses upon dunghills to be devoured and eaten up by dogs and swine, or otherwise fling them a little further off to the direption, tearing and rending asunder of their joints and members by the wild beasts of the field, as unworthy to receive the gentle, the desired, the last kind embraces of the great alma mater, the earth, commonly called burial. Dearly beloved son, have an especial care that after my decease none of these laws be received in any of your kingdoms. For whilst I breathe, by the grace and assistance of God, I shall give good order. Seeing therefore, you have totally referred unto my discretion the disposure of you in marriage, I am fully of an opinion that I shall provide sufficiently well for you in that point. Make ready and prepare yourself for Panurge's voyage. Take along with you Epistemon, Friar John, and such others as you will choose. Do with my treasures what unto yourself shall seem most expedient. None of your actions, I promise you, can in any manner of way displease me. Take out of my arsenal thallas whatsoever equipage, furniture, or provision you please, together with such pilots, mariners, and trutchmen as you have a mind to, and with the first fair and favorable wind set sail and make out to sea in the name of God our Saviour. In the meanwhile, during your absence, I shall not be negative of providing a wife for you, nor of those preparations which are requisite to be made for the more sumptuous solemnizing of your nuptials with a most splendid feast, if ever there was any in the world, since the days of Ahasuerus. Chapter 3.49. How Pantagruel did put himself in a readiness to go to sea, and of the herb named Pantagruelian. Within very few days after that Pantagruel had taken his leave of the good Gargantua, who devoutly prayed for his son's happy voyage, he arrived at the seaport, near to Samelo, accompanied with Panurge, Epistemon, Friar John of the Funnels, Abbot of the Leam, and others of the royal house, especially with Xenomanes the great traveller and thwarter of dangerous ways, who was come at the bidding and appointment of Panurge, of whose castle-wick of Salmigondin he did hold some petty inheritance by the tenure of a mean fee. Pantagruel, being come thither, prepared and made ready for launching a fleet of ships, to the number of those which Ajax of Salamine had of old equipped in convoy of the Grecian soldiery against the Trojan state. He likewise picked out for his use so many mariners, pilots, sailors, interpreters, artificers, officers, and soldiers as he thought fitting, and therewithal made provision of so much victuals of all sorts artillery, munition of divers kinds, clothes, moneys, and other such luggage, stuff, baggage, chaffer, and furniture, as he deemed needful for carrying on the design of a so tedious, long, and perilous voyage. Amongst other things, it was observed how he caused some of his vessels to be fraught and loaded with a great quantity of an herb of his called Pantagruelian, not only of the green and raw sort of it, but of the confected also, and of that which was notably well befitted for present use after the fashion of conserves. The herb Pantagruelian hath a little root somewhat hard and rough, roundish, terminating in an obtuse and very blunt point, and having some of its veins, strings, or filaments colored with some spots of white, never fixeth itself into the ground above the profoundness almost of a cubit or foot and a half. From the root thereof proceedeth the only stalk, orbicular, cane-like, green without, whitish within, and hollow like the stem of Smyanium, Aulus atrum, beans, and gentian, full of long threads, straight, easy to be broken, jagged, snipped, nicked, and notched a little after the manner of pillars and columns, slightly furrowed, chamfered, guttered, and channeled, and full of fibers or hairs like strings, in which consisteth the chief value and dignity of the herb, especially in that part thereof which is termed mesa, as he would say the mean, and in that other, which hath got the denomination of Malacia. Its height is commonly of 5 or 6 foot. Yet sometimes it is of such a tall growth as doth surpass the length of a lance, but that is only when it meeteth with a sweet, easy, warm, wet, and well-soaked soil as is the ground of the territory of Aulon, and that of Racia, near to Prenest in Sabinian, that it want not for rain enough about the season of the fishers, holidays, and the estival solstice. There are many trees whose height is by it very far exceeded, and you might call it dendromalish by the authority of Theophrastus. The plant every year perisheth, the tree neither in the trunk, root, bark, or boughs being durable. From the stalk of this Pantagruelian plant there issue forth several large and great branches, whose leaves have thrice as much length as breadth, always green, roughish, and rugged like the orcanet, or Spanish bugloss, hardish, slit round about like unto a sickle, or as the saxifragum, betony, and finally ending as it were in the points of a Macedonian spear, or of such a lancet as surgeons commonly make use of in their phlebotomizing tiltings. The figure and shape of the leaves thereof is not much different from that of those of the ash tree, or of agrimony, the herb itself being so like the eupatorian plant that many skillful herbalists have called it the domestic eupator, and the eupator the wild Pantagruelian. These leaves are in equal and parallel distances spread around the stalk by the number in every rank either of 5 or 7. Nature having so highly favored and cherished this plant that she hath richly adorned it with these 2 odd, divine, and mysterious numbers. The smell thereof is somewhat strong, and not very pleasing to nice, tender, and delicate noses. The seed enclosed therein mounteth up to the very top of its stalk, and a little above it. This is a numerous herb, for there is no less abundance of it than of any other whatsoever. Some of these plants are spherical, some rhomboid, and some of an oblong shape, and all of those either black, bright-colored, or tawny, rude to the touch, and mantled with a quickly blasted-away coat, yet such a one as is of a delicious taste and savor to all shrill and sweetly singing birds, such as linnets, goldfinches, larks, canary birds, yellowhammers, and others of that airy chirping choir. But it would quite extinguish the natural heat and procreative virtue of the semence of any man who would eat much and often of it. And although that of old amongst the Greeks there was certain kinds of fritters and pancakes, buns and tarts, made thereof, which commonly for a liquorish daintiness were presented on the table after supper to delight the palate and make the wine relish the better. Yet is it of a difficult concoction and offensive to the stomach. For it engendereth bad and unwholesome blood, and with its exorbitant heat woundeth them with grievous, hurtful, smart, and noisome vapors. And as in divers plants and trees there are two sexes, male and female, which is perceptible in laurels, palms, cypresses, oaks, holmes, the daffodil, mandrake, fern, the agaric, mushroom, birthwort, turpentine, pennyroyal, peony, rose of the mount, and many other such like. Even so in this herb there is a male which beareth no flower at all, yet it is very copious of and abundant in seed. There is likewise in it a female, which hath great store and plenty of whitish flowers, serviceable to little or no purpose, nor doth it carry in its seed of any worth at all, at least comparable to that of the male. It hath also a larger leaf, and much softer than that of the male, nor doth it altogether grow to so great a height. This Pantagruelian is to be sown at the first coming of the swallows, and is to be plucked out of the ground when the grasshoppers begin to be a little hoarse. Chapter 3.5. How the famous Pantagruelian ought to be prepared and wrought. The herb Pantagruelian, in September, under the autumnal equinox, is dressed and prepared several ways, according to the various fancies of the people and diversity of the climates wherein it groweth. The first instruction which Pantagruel gave concerning it was to divest and despoil the stalk and stem thereof of all its flowers and seeds, to macerate and mortify it in pond, pool, or lake water, which is to be made run a little for 5 days together, properly lake water, which is to be made stagnant, not current, for 5 days together, 1,000. If the season be dry and the water hot, or for full 9 or 12 days if the weather be cloudish and the water cold. Then must it be parched before the sun, till it be drained of its moisture. After this it is in the shadow, where the sun shines not, to be peeled and its rind pulled off. Then are the fibers and strings thereof to be parted, wherein, as we have already said, consisteth its prime virtue, price, and efficacy, and severed from the woody part thereof, which is unprofitable, and serveth hardly to any other use than to make a clear and glistering blaze, to kindle the fire, and for the play, pastime, and disport of little children to blow up hogs, bladders, and make them rattle. Many times some use is made thereof by tippling sweet-lipped bibbers, who out of it frame quills and pipes, through which they with their liquor-attractive breath suck up the new dainty wine from the bung of the barrel. Some modern Pantagruelists, to shun and avoid that manual labor which such a separating and partitional work would of necessity require, employ certain cataractic instruments, composed and formed after the same manner that the froward, pettish, and angry Juno did hold the fingers of both her hands interwovenly clenched together, when she would have hindered the childbirth delivery of Alcmena at the nativity of Hercules. And athwart those cataracts they break and bruise to very trash the woody parcels, thereby to preserve the better the fibers, which are the precious and excellent parts. In and with this sole operation do these acquiesce, and are contented, who, contrary to the received opinion of the whole earth, and in a manner paradoxical to all philosophers, gain their livelihoods backwards and by recoiling. But those that love to hold it at a higher rate, and prize it according to its value, for their own greater profit do the very same which is told us of the recreation of the 3 fatal sister Parsi, or of the nocturnal exercise of the noble Circe, or yet of the excuse which Penelope made to her fond wooing youngsters and effeminate courtiers during the long absence of her husband Ulysses. By these means is this herb put into a way to display its inestimable virtues, whereof I will discover a part, for to relate all is a thing impossible to do. I have already interpreted and exposed before you the denomination thereof. I find that plants have their names given and bestowed upon them after several ways. Some got the name of him who first found them out, knew them, sowed them, improved them by culture, qualified them to tractability, and appropriated them to the uses and subserviences they were fit for, as the mercurial from Mercury, Panacea from Panis, the daughter of Aesculapius, Armois from Artemis, who is Diana, Eupatoria from the king Eupator, Telephion from Telephus, Euphorbium from Euphorbus, King Juba's physician, Clymnos from Clymnus, Alcibiadium from Alcibiades, Gentian from Gentius, king of Sclavonia, and so forth, through a great many other herbs or plants. Truly, in ancient times this prerogative of imposing the inventor's name upon an herb found out by him was held in a so great account and estimation, that, as a controversy arose betwixt Neptune and Pallas, from which of them two that land should receive its denomination, which had been equally found out by them both together though thereafter it was called, and had the appellation of Athens, from Athene, which is Minerva just, so would Lynceus, king of Scythia, have treacherously slain the young Triptolemus, whom Ceres had sent to show unto mankind the invention of corn, which until then had been utterly unknown, to the end that, after the murder of the messenger, whose death he made account to have kept secret, he might, by imposing, with the less suspicion of false dealing, his own name upon the said found-out seed, acquire unto himself an immortal honor and glory for having been the inventor of a grain so profitable and necessary to and for the use of human life. For the wickedness of which treasonable attempt, he was by Ceres transformed into that wild beast, which by some is called a lynx, and by others an ounce. Such also was the ambition of others upon the like occasion, as appeareth by that very sharp wars and of a long continuance have been made of old betwixt some residentiary kings in Cappadocia upon this only debate, of whose name a certain herb should have the appellation, by reason of which difference, so troublesome and expensive to them all, it was by them called pulmonian, and by us for the same cause termed makebait. Other herbs and plants there are which retain the names of the countries from whence they were transported, as the Median apples from Media, where they first grew, Punic apples from Punicia, that is to say, Carthage, Ligusticum, which we call lovage, from Liguria, the coast of Genoa, rhubarb from a flood in Barbary, as Ammianus attesteth, called rue, Santonica from a region of that name, fenugreek from Greece, gastanes from a country so called, persicaria from Persia, sabine from a territory of that appellation, steeches from the Steechhead Islands, Spica Celtica from the land of the Celtic Gauls, and so throughout a great many other, which were tedious to enumerate. Some others, again, have obtained their denominations by way of antiphrases or contrariety. As absinthe, because it is contrary to synthose, for it is bitter to the taste in drinking. Hollistein, as if it were all bones, whilst on the contrary there is no frailer, tenderer, nor brittler herb in the whole production of nature than it. There are some other sorts of herbs which have got their names from their virtues and operations, as Aristolochia, because it helpeth women in childbirth; lichen, for that it cureth the disease of that name; mallow, because it mollifieth; calithricum, because it maketh the hair of a bright color; alyssum, ephemerum, betium, nasturtium, ainbane, henbane, and so forth through many more. Other some there are which have obtained their names from the admirable qualities that are found to be in them, as heliotropium, which is the marigold, because it followeth the sun, so that at the sun rising it displayeth and spreads itself out, at his ascending it mounteth, at his declining it waneth, and when he is set it is close shut. Adiantin, because, although it grow near unto watery places, and albeit you should let it lie in water a long time, it will nevertheless retain no moisture nor humidity. Hieratia, eryngium, and so throughout a great many more. There are also a great many herbs and plants which have retained the very same names of the men and women who have been metamorphosed and transformed in them. As from Daphne the laurel is called also Daphne, myrrh from Myrrha, the daughter of Cynaris, pythies from Pythies, Cinara, which is the artichoke, from one of that name, narcissus, with saffron, smilax, and divers others. Many herbs likewise have got their names of those things which they seem to have some resemblance to, as hippurus, because it hath the likeness of a horse's tail; alopurus, because it representeth in similitude the tail of a fox; Cilian, from a flea which it resembleth; delphinium, for that it is like a dolphin fish; bugloss is so called because it is an herb like an ox's tongue; iris, so called because in its flowers it hath some resemblance of the rainbow; myasota, because it is like the ear of a mouse; coronapus, for that it is of the likeness of a crow's foot. A great many other such there are, which here to recite were needless. Furthermore, as there are herbs and plants which have had their names from those of men, so by a reciprocal denomination have the surnames of many families taken their origin from them, as the Fabii, a Fabus, beans; the Pissons, a Pisces, peas; the Lentuli from lentils; the cicerons, a ciceribus vel ciceris, a sort of pulse called chickpeas, and so forth. In some plants and herbs, the resemblance or likeness hath been taken from a higher mark or object, as when we say Venus, navel, Venus, hair, Venus, tub, Jupiter's beard, Jupiter's eye, Mars, blood, the hermidactyl or Mercury's fingers, which are all of them names of herbs, as there are a great many more of the like appellation. Others, again, have received their denomination from their forms, such as the trefoil because it is 3-leaved, pentaphyllin for having 5 leaves, serpolet because it creepeth along the ground, helxine, pedaste, myrabalin, which the Arabians called bin, as if you would say an acorn, for it hath a kind of resemblance thereto, and withal is very oily. Chapter 3.51. Why it is called Pantagruelian, and of the admirable virtues thereof. By such like means of attaining to a denomination the fabulous ways, being only from thence accepted. For the Lord forbid that we should make use of any fables in this, a so veritable history as this herb called Pantagruelian, for Pantagruel was the inventor thereof. I do not say of the plant itself, but of a certain use which it serves for, exceeding odious and hateful to thieves and robbers, unto whom it is more contrarious and hurtful than the strangleweed and chokefitch is to the flax, the cat's-tail to the brakes, the sheave-grass to the mowers of hay, the fitches to the chickney peas, the darnel to barley, the hatchet-fitch to the lentil pulse, the antramium to the beans, tares to wheat, ivy to walls, the water-lily to lecherous monks, the birchen rod to the scholars of the College of Navarre in Paris, colewort to the vine-tree, garlic to the lodestone, onions to the sight, fernseed to women with child, willow grain to vicious nuns, the yew-tree shade to those that sleep under it, wolfsbane to wolves and lizards, the smell of fig-tree to mad bulls, hemlock to goslings, purslin to the teeth, or oil to trees. For we have seen many of those rogues, by virtue and right application of this herb, finish their lives short and long, after the manner of Phillis, queen of Thracia, of Bonosus, emperor of Rome, of Amata, king Latinus's wife, of Iphi's Autolycus, Lycamb, Arachne, Phaedra, Leda, Achaeus, king of Lydia, and many thousands more, who were chiefly angry and vexed at this disaster therein, that, without being otherwise sick or evil disposed in their bodies, by a touch only of the Pantagruelian, they came on a sudden to have the passage obstructed, and their pipes, through which were wont to bolt so many jolly sayings, and to enter so many luscious morsels, stopped more cleverly than ever could have done the squinancy. Others have been heard most woefully to lament, at the very instant when Atropos was about to cut the thread of their life, that Pantagruel held them by the gorge. But well-a-day, it was not Pantagruel, he never was an executioner. It was the Pantagruelian, manufactured and fashioned into an halter, and serving in the place and office of a cravat. In that, verily, they soul-sized and spoke improperly, unless you would excuse them by a trope, which alloweth us to posit the inventor in the place of the thing invented, as when Ceres is taken for bread, and Bacchus put instead of wine. I swear to you here, by the good and frolic words which are to issue out of that wine bottle which is a cooling below in the copper vessel full of fountain water, that the noble Pantagruel never snatched any man by the throat, unless it was such a one as was altogether careless and neglective of those obviating remedies which were preventive of the thirst to come. It is also termed Pantagruelian by a similitude. For Pantagruel, at the very first minute of his birth, was no less tall than this herb is long whereof I speak unto you, his measure having been then taken the more easy that he was born in the season of the great drought, when they were busiest in the gathering of the said herb, to wit, at that time when Icarus's dog, with his fiery bawling and barking at the sun, maketh the whole world troglodytic, and enforceth people everywhere to hide themselves in dens and subterranean caves. It is likewise called Pantagruelian, because of the notable and singular qualities, virtues, and properties thereof. For as Pantagruel hath been the idea, pattern, prototype, and exemplary of all jovial perfection and accomplishment in the truth, whereof I believe there is none of you gentlemen, drinkers that putteth any question so in this Pantagruelian, have I found so much efficacy and energy, so much completeness and excellency, so much exquisiteness and rarity, and so many admirable effects and operations of a transcendent nature, that if the worth and virtue thereof had been known when those trees, by the relation of the prophet, made election of a wooden king to rule and govern over them, it without all doubt would have carried away from all the rest the plurality of votes and suffrages. Shall I yet say more? If Oxylus, the son of Oreus, had begotten this plant upon his sister Hamadryas, he had taken more delight in the value and perfection of it alone than in all his 8 children, so highly renowned by our ablest mythologians that they have sedulously recommended their names to the never-failing tuition of an eternal remembrance. The eldest child was a daughter, whose name was Vine, the next born was a boy, and his name was Fig Tree, the third was called Walnut Tree, the fourth Oak, the fifth Sorbapple Tree, the sixth Ash, the seventh Poplar, and the last had the name of Elm, who was the greatest surgeon in his time. I shall forbear to tell you how the juice or sap thereof, being poured and distilled within the ears, killeth every kind of vermin that by any manner of putrefaction cometh to be bred and engendered there, and destroyeth also any whatsoever other animal that shall have entered in thereat. If, likewise, you put a little of the said juice within a pail or bucket full of water, you shall see the water instantly turn and grow thick therewith, as if it were milk curds, whereof the virtue is so great that the water thus curded is a present remedy for horses subject to the colic, and such as strike at their own flanks. The root thereof well boiled mollifieth the joints, softeneth the hardness of shrunken sinews, is every way comfortable to the nerves, and good against all cramps and convulsions, as likewise all cold and knotty gouts. If you would speedily heal a burning, whether occasioned by water or fire, apply thereto a little raw Pantagruelian, that is to say, take it so as it cometh out of the ground, without bestowing any other preparation or composition upon it, but have a special care to change it for some fresher in lieu thereof as soon as you shall find it waxing dry upon the sore. Without this herb kitchens would be detested, the tables of dining rooms abhorred, although there were great plenty and variety of most dainty and sumptuous dishes of meat set down upon them, and the choicest beds also, how richly soever adorned with gold, silver, amber, ivory, porphyry, and the mixture of most precious metals, would without it yield no delight or pleasure to the reposers in them. Without it millers could neither carry wheat, nor any other kind of corn to the mill, nor would they be able to bring back from thence flour, or any other sort of meal whatsoever. Without it, how could the papers and writs of lawyers' clients be brought to the bar? Seldom is the mortar, lime, or plaster brought to the workhouse without it. Without it, how should the water be got out of a draw-well? In what case would tableans, notaries, copists, makers of counterpanes, writers, clerks, secretaries, scriveners, and such-like persons be without it? Were it not for it, what would become of the toll rates and rentrolls? Would not the noble art of printing perish without it? Whereof could the chassis or paper windows be made? How should the bells be rung? The altars of Isis are adorned therewith, the Pastaforian priests are therewith clad and accoutred, and whole human nature covered and wrapped therein at its first position and production in and into this world. All the lenific trees of Sears, the bombast and cotton bushes in the territories near the Persian Sea and Gulf of Bengala, the Arabian swans, together with the plants of Malta, do not all of them clothe, attire, and apparel so many persons as this one herb alone. Soldiers are nowadays much better sheltered under it than they were in former times, when they lay in tents covered with skins. It overshadows the theaters and amphitheaters from the heat of a scorching sun. It begirdeth and encompasseth forests, chases, parks, copses, and groves, for the pleasure of hunters. It descendeth into the salt and fresh of both sea and river waters, for the profit of fishers. By it are boots of all sizes, buskins, gamashes, broadkins, gambados, shoes, pumps, slippers, and every cobbled ware wrought and made steadable for the use of man. By it the butt and rover bows are strung, the crossbows bended, and the slings made fixed. And as if it were an herb every whit as holy as the vervain, and reverenced by ghosts, spirits, hobgoblins, fiends, and phantoms, the bodies of deceased men are never buried without it. I will proceed yet further. By the means of this fine herb the invisible substances are visibly stopped, arrested, taken, detained, and prisoner-like committed to their receptive jails. Heavy and ponderous weights are by it heaved, lifted up, turned, veered, drawn, carried, and every way moved quickly, nimbly, and easily to the great profit and emolument of humankind. When I perpend with myself these and such like marvelous effects of this wonderful herb, It seemeth strange unto me how the invention of so useful a practice did escape through so many by past ages the knowledge of the ancient philosophers, considering the inestimable utility which from thence proceeded, and the immense labor which without it they did undergo in their pristine elucubrations. By virtue thereof, through the retention of some aerial gusts, are the huge rambarges, mighty galleons, the large floats, the Chiliander, the myriander ships launched from their stations, and set a-going at the pleasure and arbitrament of their rulers, condaires, and steersmen. By the help thereof those remote nations, whom nature seemed so unwilling to have discovered to us, and so desirous to have kept them still in abscondito and hidden from us, that the ways through which their countries were to be reached unto were not only totally unknown, but judged also to be altogether impermeable and inaccessible, are now arrived to us, and we to them. Those voyages outreached flights of birds, and far surpassed the scope of feathered fowls, how swift soever they had been on the wing, and notwithstanding that advantage which they have of us in swimming through the air. Taprobin hath seen the heaths of Lapland, and both the Javas and Riphean mountains. Wide distant Febal shall see the Lim, and the islanders drink of the flood Euphrates. By it the chill-mouthed Boreas hath surveyed the parched mansions of the torrid Auster, and Eurus visited the regions which Zephyrus hath under his command. Yea, in such sort have interviews been made by the assistance of this sacred herb, that, maugre longitudes and latitudes, and all the variations of the zones, the Periaean people, and Antiochian, Amphician, Heterossian, and Parisian had oft rendered and received mutual visits to and from other, upon all the climates. These strange exploits bred such astonishment to the celestial intelligences, to all the marine and terrestrial gods, that they were on a sudden all afraid. From which amazement, when they saw how, by means of this blessed Pantagruelian, the Arctic people looked upon the Antarctic, scoured the Atlantic Ocean, passed the tropics, pushed through the torrid zone, measured all the zodiac, sported under the equinoctial, having both poles level with their horizon, they judged it high time to call a council for their own safety and preservation. The Olympic gods, being all and each of them affrighted at the sight of such achievements, said, Pantagruel hath shapen work enough for us, and put us more to a plunge and nearer our wits, and by this sole herb of his than did of old the Aloide by overturning mountains. He very speedily is to be married, and shall have many children by his wife. It lies not in our power to oppose this destiny, for it hath passed through the hands and spindles of the fatal sisters, necessity's inexorable daughters. Who knows but by his sons may be found out an herb of such another virtue and prodigious energy, as that by the aid thereof, in using it aright according to their father's skill, they may contrive a way for humankind to pierce into the high Aryan clouds, get up unto the springhead of the hail, take an inspection of the snowy sources, and shut and open as they please the sluices from whence proceed the floodgates of the rain. Then, prosecuting their ethereal voyage, they may step in unto the lightning workhouse and shop, where all the thunderbolts are forged, where, seizing on the magazine of heaven and storehouse of our warlike fire munition, they may discharge a bouncing peal or two of thundering ordnance for joy of their arrival to these new supernal places, and, charging those tonitrual guns afresh, turn the whole force of that artillery against ourselves, wherein we most confided. Then is it like they will set forward to invade the territories of the moon, whence, passing through both Mercury and Venus, the sun will serve them for a torch, to show the way from Mars to Jupiter and Saturn. We shall not then be able to resist the impetuosity of their intrusion, nor put a stoppage to their entering in at all, whatever regions, domiciles, or mansions of the spangled firmament they shall have any mind to see, to stay in, to travel through for their recreation. All the celestial signs together, with the constellations of the fixed stars, will jointly be at their devotion then. Some will take up their lodging at the Ram, some at the Bull, and others at the Twins, some at the Crab, some at the Lion Inn, and others at the Sign of the Virgin, some at the Balance, others at the Scorpion, and others will be quartered at the Archer. Some will be harbored at the Goat, some at the Water-pourer's Sign, some at the Fishes, some will lie at the Crown, some at the Harp, some at the Golden Eagle and the Dolphin, some at the Flying Horse, some at the Ship, some at the Great, some at the Little Bear. And so throughout the glistening hostelries of the whole twinkling asteristic welkin. There will be sojourners come from the earth, who, longing after the taste of the sweet cream, of their own skimming off, from the best milk of all the dairy of the galaxy, will set themselves at table down with us, drink of our nectar and ambrosia, and take to their own beds at night for wives and concubines our fairest goddesses, the only means whereby they can be deified. A junta hereupon being convocated, the better to consult upon the manner of obviating a so dreadful danger. Jove, sitting in his presidential throne, asked the votes of all the other gods, which, after a profound deliberation amongst themselves on all contingencies, they freely gave at last, and then resolved unanimously to withstand the shocks of all whatsoever sublunary assaults. Chapter 3.52. How a certain kind of Pantagruelian is of that nature that the fire is not able to consume it. I have already related to you great and admirable things, but if you might be induced to adventure upon the hazard of believing some other divinity of this sacred Pantagruelian, I very willingly would tell it you. Believe it, if you will, or otherwise, believe it not, I care not which of them you do, they are both alike to me. It shall be sufficient for my purpose to have told you the truth, and the truth I will tell you. But to enter in thereat, because it is of a naggy, difficult, and rugged access, this is the question which I ask of you. If I had put within this bottle 2 pints, the one of wine and the other of water, thoroughly and exactly mingled together, how would you unmix them? After what manner would you go about to sever them, and separate the one liquor from the other, in such sort that you render me the water apart, free from the wine, and the wine also pure, without the intermixture of 1 drop of water, and both of them in the same measure, quantity, and taste that I had embottled them? Or, to state the question otherwise, if your carmen and mariners, entrusted for the provision of your houses with the bringing of a certain considerable number of tuns, puncheons, pipes, barrels, and hogsheads of Graves wine, or of the wine of Orleans, Beaune, and Mayrevaux, should drink out the half, and afterwards with water fill up the other empty halves of the vessels as full as before, as the Limoussins used to do in their carriages by wains and carts of the wines of Argentan and Sangaltier. After that, how would you part the water from the wine, and purify them both in such a case? I understand you well enough. Your meaning is that I must do it with an ivy funnel. That is written, it is true, and the verity thereof explored by 1,000 experiments. You have learned to do this feat before, I see it. But those that have never known it, nor at any time have seen the like, would hardly believe that it were possible. Let us nevertheless proceed. But put the case, we were now living in the age of Sylla, Marius, Caesar, and other such Roman emperors, or that we were in the time of our ancient Druids, whose custom was to burn and calcine the dead bodies of their parents and lords, and that you had a mind to drink the ashes or cinders of your wives or fathers in the infused liquor of some good white wine, as Artemisia drunk the dust and ashes of her husband Mausolus. Or otherwise, that you did determine to have them reserved in some fine urn or reliquary pot. How would you save the ashes apart, and separate them from those other cinders and ashes into which the fuel of the funeral and bustuary fire hath been converted? Answer if you can. By my figgins, I believe it will trouble you so to do. Well, I will dispatch, and tell you that, if you take of this celestial Pantagruelian so much as is needful to cover the body of the defunct, and after that you shall have enwrapped and bound therein as hard and closely as you can the corpse of the said deceased persons, and sewed up the folding sheet with thread of the same stuff, throw it into the fire. How great or ardent soever it be, it matters not a straw. The fire through this Pantagruelian will burn the body and reduce to ashes the bones thereof. And the Pantagruelian shall be not only not consumed nor burnt, but also shall neither lose 1 atom of the ashes enclosed within it, nor receive 1 atom of the huge bustuary heap of ashes resulting from the blazing conflagration of things combustible laid round about it, but shall at last, when taken out of the fire, be fairer, whiter, and much cleaner than when you did put it in at first. Therefore it is called asbeston, which is as much to say as incombustible. Great plenty is to be found thereof in Carpasia, as likewise in the climate Diacenes, at very easy rates. Oh, how rare and admirable a thing it is, that the fire which devoureth, consumeth, and destroyeth all such things else, should cleanse, purge, and whiten this sole Pantagruelian Carpasian asbeston. If you mistrust the verity of this relation, and demand for further confirmation of my assertion a visible sign, as the Jews and such incredulous infidels used to do, take a fresh egg, and orbicularly, or rather ovally, enfold it within this divine Pantagruelian. When it is so wrapped up, put it in the hot embers of a fire, how great or ardent soever it be, and having left it there as long as you will, you shall at last, at your taking it out of the fire, find the egg roasted hard, and as it were burnt, without any alteration, change, mutation, or so much as a calefaction of the sacred Pantagruelian. For less than £1,000,000 sterling, modified, taken down, and amaterated to the 12th part of 1 fourpence halfpenny farthing, you are able to put it to a trial and make proof thereof. Do not think to overmatch me here, by paragoning with it, in the way of a more eminent comparison, the salamander. That is a fib, for, albeit a little ordinary fire, such as is used in dining rooms and chambers, gladden, cheer up, exhilarate, and quicken it, yet may I warrantably enough assure that in the flaming fire of a furnace it will, like any other animated creature, be quickly suffocated, choked, consumed, and destroyed. We have seen the experiment thereof, and Galen many ages ago hath clearly demonstrated and confirmed it, lib. 3 De Temperamentiis, and Dioscorides maintaineth the same doctrine, lib. 2. Do not here instance in competition with this sacred herb the feather alum or the wooden tower of Piraeus, which Lucius Sylla was never able to get burnt. For that Archelaus, governor of the town for Mithridates, king of Pontus, had plastered it all over on the outside with the said alum. Nor would I have you to compare there with the herb which Alexander Cornelius called Aeonum, and said that it had some resemblance with that oak which bears the mistletoe, and that it could neither be consumed nor receive any manner of prejudice by fire nor by water, no more than the mistletoe, of which was built, said he, the so renowned ship Argus. Search where you please for those that will believe it. I in that point desire to be excused. Neither would I wish you to parallel therewith, although I cannot deny, but that it is of a very marvellous nature that sort of tree which groweth alongst the mountains of Brianson and Ambron, which produceth out of his root the good agaric. From its body it yieldeth unto us a so excellent rosin, that Galen hath been bold to equal it to the turpentine. Upon the delicate leaves thereof it retaineth for our use that sweet heavenly honey which is called the manna, and, although it be of a gummy, oily, fat, and greasy substance, it is, notwithstanding, unconsumable by any fire. It is in Greek and Latin called larix. The Alpinese name is mels. The Antinorides and Venetians term it large, which gave occasion to that castle in Piedmont to receive the denomination of Larignum, by putting Julius Caesar to a stand at his return from amongst the Gauls. Julius Caesar commanded all the yeomen, boors, hinds, and other inhabitants in, near unto, and about the Alps and Piedmont, to bring all manner of victuals and provision for an army to those places, which on the military road he had appointed to receive them for the use of his marching soldiery. To which ordinance all of them were obedient, save only those as were within the garrison of Larignum, who, trusting in the natural strength of the place, would not pay their contribution. The emperor, purposing to chastise them for their refusal, caused his whole army to march straight towards that castle, before the gate whereof was erected a tower built of huge big spars and rafters of the larch tree, fast bound together with pins and pegs of the same wood, and interchangeably laid on one another, after the fashion of a pile or stack of timber. Set up in the fabric thereof to such an apt and convenient height, that from the parapet above the portcullis, they thought with stones and levers to beat off and drive away such as should approach thereto. When Caesar had understood that the chief defense of those within the castle did consist in stones and clubs, and that it was not an easy matter to sling, hurl, dart, throw, or cast them so far as to hinder the approaches, he forthwith commanded his men to throw great store of bavins, faggots, and fascines round about the castle, and when they had made the heap of a competent height, to put them all in a fair fire, which was thereupon incontinently done. The fire put amidst the faggots was so great and so high that it covered the whole castle, that they might well imagine the tower would thereby be altogether burnt to dust and demolished. Nevertheless, contrary to all their hopes and expectations, when the flame ceased, and that the faggots were quite burnt and consumed, the tower appeared as whole, sound, and entire as ever. Caesar, after a serious consideration had thereof, commanded a compass to be taken without the distance of a stone cast from the castle round about it there, with ditches and entrenchments to form a blockade, which when the Larignans understood, they rendered themselves upon terms. And then by a relation from them it was that Caesar learned the admirable nature and virtue of this wood, which of itself produceth neither fire, flame, nor coal, and wood, therefore, in regard of that rare quality of incombustibility, have been admitted into this rank and degree of a true Pantagruelianal plant. And that so much the rather, for that Pantagruel directed that all the gates, doors, angaports, windows, gutters, frettist and embowed ceilings, cants, and other whatsoever wooden furniture in the Abbey of the Leam, should be all materiated of this kind of timber. He likewise caused to cover therewith the sterns, stems, cookrooms or laps, hatches, decks, courses, bends, and walls of his carracks, ships, galleons, galleys, brigantines, foists, frigates, creers, barks, floats, pinks, pinnaces, hoys, ketches, capers, and other vessels of his Thalassian arsenal. Were it not that the wood or timber of the larch tree, being put within a large and ample furnace full of huge vehemently flaming fire, proceeding from the fuel of other sorts and kinds of wood, cometh at last to be corrupted, consumed, dissipated, and destroyed, as are stones in a lime kiln. But this Pantagruelian asbeston is rather by the fire renewed and cleansed than by the flames thereof consumed or changed. Therefore, Arabians, Indians, Sabaeans sing not in hymns, and Iopians your incense, myrrh, or ebony. Come here a nobler plant to see, and carry home at any rate some seed that you may propagate. If in your soil it takes, to heaven a thousand thanks be given, and say with France it goodly goes, where the Pantagruelian grows. End of Book 3. Book 4. The fourth book. The Translator's Preface. Reader, I don't know what kind of a preface I must write to find thee courteous, an epithet too often bestowed without a cause. The author of this work has been as sparing of what we call good nature, as most readers are nowadays. So I am afraid his translator and commentator is not to expect much more than has been showed them. What's worse, there are but two sorts of taking prefaces, as there are but two kinds of prologues to plays. For Mr. Bayes was doubtless in the right when he said that if thunder and lightning could not fright an audience into complacence, the sight of the poet with a rope about his neck might work them into pity. Some, indeed, have bullied many of you into applause, and railed at your faults that you might think them without any. And others, more safely, have spoken kindly of you, that you might think, or at least speak, as favorably of them, and be flattered into patience. Now, I fancy, there's nothing less difficult to attempt than the first method, for, in this blessed age, 'tis as easy to find a bully without courage, as a whore without beauty, or a writer without wit, though those qualifications are so necessary in their respective professions. The mischief is, that you seldom allow any to rail besides yourselves, and cannot bear a pride which shocks your own. As for wheedling you into a liking of a work, I must confess it seems the safest way. But though flattery pleases you well when it is particular, you hate it, as little concerning you, when it is general. Then we Knights of the Quill are a stiff-necked generation, who as seldom care to seem to doubt the worth of our writings and their being liked, as we love to flatter more than one at a time, and had rather draw our pens and stand up for the beauty of our works, as some arrant fools used to do for that of their mistresses, to the last drop of our ink. And truly this submission, which sometimes wheedles you into pity, as seldom decoys you into love, as the awkward cringing of an antiquated fop, as moneyless as he is ugly, affects an experienced fair one. Now we as little value your pity as a lover his mistresses, well satisfied that it is only a less uncivil way of dismissing us. But what if neither of these two ways will work upon you, of which doleful truth some of our playwrights stand so many living monuments? Why then, truly I think on no other way at present but blending the two into one. And, from this marriage of huffing and cringing, there will result a new kind of careless medley, which, perhaps, will work upon both sorts of readers, those who are to be hectored, and those whom we must creep to. At least, it is like to please by its novelty, and it will not be the first monster that has pleased you when regular nature could not do it. If uncommon worth, lively wit, and deep learning wove into wholesome satire, a bold, good, and vast design admirably pursued, truth set out in its true light, and a method how to arrive to its oracle, can recommend a work, I am sure this has enough to please any reasonable man. The 3 books published some time since, which are in a manner an entire work, were kindly received. Yet, in the French, they come far short of these 2, which are also entire pieces. For the satire is all general here, much more obvious and consequently more entertaining. Even my long explanatory preface was not thought improper. Though I was so far from being allowed time to make it methodical, that at first only a few pages were intended, yet as fast as they were printed I wrote on, till it proved at last like one of those towns built little at first, then enlarged, where you see promiscuously an odd variety of all sorts of irregular buildings. I hope the remarks I give now will not please less, for, as I have translated the work which they explain, I had more time to make them, though as little to write them. It would be needless to give here a large account of my performance, for, after all, you readers care no more for this or that apology or pretense of Mr. Translator, if the version does not please you, than we do for a blundering cook's excuse after he has spoiled a good dish in the dressing. Nor can the first pretend to much praise, besides that of giving his author's sense in its full extent, and copying his style, if it is to be copied, since he has no share in the invention or disposition of what he translates. Yet there was no small difficulty in doing Rabelais justice in that double respect. The obsolete words and turns of phrase, and dark subjects, often as darkly treated, make the sense hard to be understood even by a Frenchman, and it cannot be easy to give it the free, easy air of an original. For even what seems most common talk in one language is what is often the most difficult to be made so in another. And Horace's thoughts of comedy may be well applied to this. Creditor, ex medio quia res arcessit, haber sudoris minimum, sed habet commodia tantum plus oneris, quanto venii minus. Far be it from me, for all this, to value myself upon hitting the words of cant in which my drolling author is so luxuriant. For though such words have stood me in good stead, I scarce can forbear thinking myself unhappy in having insensibly hoarded up so much gibberish and Billingsgate trash in my memory. Nor could I forbear asking of myself, as an Italian cardinal said on another account, 500 and high tu pigliato tant coglionary. Where the devil didst thou rake up all these fripperies? It was not less difficult to come up to the author's sublime expressions. Nor would I have attempted such a task, but that I was ambitious of giving a view of the most valuable work of the greatest genius of his age, to the machinas and best genius of this. For I am not overfond of so ungrateful a task as translating, and would rejoice to see less versions and more originals. So the latter were not as bad as many of the first are, through want of encouragement. Some indeed have deservedly gained esteem by translating, yet not many condescend to translate, but such as cannot invent, though to do the first well requires often as much genius as to do the latter. I wish, reader, thou mayest be as willing to do my author justice, as I have strove to do him right. Yet if thou art a brother of the quill, it is 10 to 1 thou art too much in love with thy own dear productions to admire those of one of thy trade. However, I know 3 or 4 who have not such a mighty opinion of themselves, but I'll not name them, lest I should be obliged to place myself among them. If thou art one of those who, though they never write, criticize everyone that does, avaunt, thou art a professed enemy of mankind and of thyself, who wilt never be pleased nor let anybody be so, and knowest no better way to fame than by striving to lessen that of others. Though wouldst thou write thou mightst be soon known, even by the butterwomen, and fly through the world in bandboxes. If thou art of the dissembling tribe, it is thy office to rail at those books which thou huggest in a corner. If thou art one of those eavesdroppers, who would have their moroseness be counted gravity, thou wilt condemn a mirth which thou art past relishing. And I know no other way to quit the score than by writing, as like enough I may something as dull or duller than thyself, if possible. If thou art one of those critics in dressing, those extemporaries of fortune, who, having lost a relation and got an estate, in an instant set up for wit and every extravagance, thou'lt either praise or discommend this book, according to the dictates of some less foolish than thyself, perhaps of one of those who, being lodged at the sign of the box and dice, will know better things than to recommend to thee a work which bids thee beware of his tricks. This book might teach thee to leave thy follies, But some will say it does not signify much to some fools whether they are so or not. For when was there a fool that thought himself one? If thou art one of those who would put themselves upon us for learned men in Greek and Hebrew, yet are mere blockheads in English, and patch together old pieces of the ancients to get themselves clothes out of them, thou art too severely mauled in this work to like it. Who then will? Some will cry. Nay, besides these, many societies that make a great figure in the world are reflected on in this book, which caused Rabelais to study to be dark, and even bedaub it with many loose expressions, that he might not be thought to have any other design than to droll, in a manner bewraying his book that his enemies might not bite it. Truly, though now the riddle is expounded, I would advise those who read it not to reflect on the author, lest he be thought to have been beforehand with them, and they be ranked among those who have nothing to show for their honesty but their money, nothing for their religion but their dissembling, or a fat benefice, nothing for their wit but their dressing, for their nobility but their title, for their gentility but their sword, for their courage but their huffing, for their preferment but their assurance, for their learning but their degrees, or for their gravity but their wrinkles or dullness. They had better laugh at one another here, as it is the custom of the world. Laughing is of all professions. The miser may hoard, the spendthrift squander, the politician plot, the lawyer wrangle, and the gamester cheat. Still their main design is to be able to laugh at one another. And here they may do it at a cheap and easy rate. After all, should this work fail to please the greater number of readers, I am sure it cannot miss being liked by those who are for witty mirth and a chirping bottle, though not by those solid sots who seem to have drudged all their youth long only that they might enjoy the sweet blessing of getting drunk every night in their old age. But those men of sense and honor who love truth and the good of mankind in general above all other things will undoubtedly countenance this work. I will not gravely insist upon its usefulness, having said enough of it in the preface, Matthew, Preface to Vol. I of Rabelais ed. 1694, to the first part. I will only add that as Homer in his Odyssey makes his hero wander 10 years through most parts of the then known world, so Rabelais, in a 3 months' voyage, makes Pantagruel take a view of almost all sorts of people and professions. With this difference, however, between the ancient mythologist and the modern, that while the Odyssey has been compared to a setting sun in respect to the Iliad's, Rabelais' last work, which is this voyage to the oracle of the bottle, by which he means truth, is justly thought his masterpiece, being wrote with more spirit, salt, and flame than the first part of his works. At near 70 years of age, his genius, far from being drained, seemed to have acquired fresh vigor and new graces the more it exerted itself, like those rivers which grow more deep, large, majestic, and useful by their course. Those who accuse the French of being as sparing of their wit, as lavish of their words, will find an Englishman in our author. I must confess, indeed, that my countrymen and other southern nations temper the one with the other in a manner as they do their wine with water, often just dashing the latter with a little of the first. Now here men love to drink their wine pure. Nay, sometimes it will not satisfy unless in its very quintessence, as in brandies, though an excess of this betrays want of sobriety as much as an excess of wit betrays a want of judgment. But I must conclude, lest I be justly taxed with wanting both. I will only add that as every language has its peculiar graces, seldom or never to be acquired by a foreigner, I cannot think I have given my author those of the English in every place. But as none compelled me to write, I fear to ask a pardon which yet the generous temper of this nation makes me hope to obtain. Albinus, a Roman, who had written in Greek, desired in his preface to be forgiven his faults of language. But Cato asked him in derision whether any had forced him to write in a tongue of which he was not an absolute master. Lucullus wrote a history in the same tongue, and said he had scattered some false Greek in it to let the world know it was the work of a Roman. I will not say as much of my writings, in which I study to be as little incorrect as the hurry of business and shortness of time will permit. But I may better say, as Tully did of the history of his consulship, which he also had written in Greek, that what errors may be found in the diction are crept in against my intent. Indeed, Livius, Andronicus, and Terence, the one a Greek, the other a Carthaginian, wrote successfully in Latin, and the latter is perhaps the most perfect model of the purity and urbanity of that tongue. But I ought not to hope for the success of those great men. Yet am I ambitious of being as subservient to the useful diversion of the ingenious of this nation as I can, which I have endeavored in this work, with hopes to attempt some greater tasks if ever I am happy enough to have more leisure. In the meantime, it will not displease me, if it is known that this is given by one who, though born and educated in France, has the love and veneration of a loyal subject for this nation. One who, by a fatality, which with many more made him say, nos patrium fugimus, et dulcia linquimus arva, is obliged to make the language of these happy regions as natural to him as he can, and thankfully say with the rest, under this Protestant government, Deus nobis hic otia fecit. Book 4. The fourth book. The Translator's Preface. Reader, I don't know what kind of a preface I must write to find thee courteous, an epithet too often bestowed without a cause. The author of this work has been as sparing of what we call good nature, as most readers are nowadays. So I am afraid his translator and commentator is not to expect much more than has been showed them. What's worse, there are but two sorts of taking prefaces, as there are but two kinds of prologues to plays. For Mr. Bayes was doubtless in the right when he said that if thunder and lightning could not fright an audience into complacence, the sight of the poet with a rope about his neck might work them into pity. Some, indeed, have bullied many of you into applause and railed at your faults that you might think them without any. And others, more safely, have spoken kindly of you, that you might think, or at least speak, as favorably of them and be flattered into patience. Now, I fancy, there's nothing less difficult to attempt than the first method, for in this blessed age, 'tis as easy to find a bully without courage as a whore without beauty, or a writer without wit, though those qualifications are so necessary in their respective professions. The mischief is that you seldom allow any to rail besides yourselves, and cannot bear a pride which shocks your own. As for wheedling you into a liking of a work, I must confess it seems the safest way. But though flattery pleases you well when it is particular, you hate it, as little concerning you, when it is general. Then we Knights of the Quill are a stiff-necked generation, who as seldom care to seem to doubt the worth of our writings and their being liked, as we love to flatter more than one at a time, and had rather draw our pens and stand up for the beauty of our works, as some errant fools used to do for that of their mistresses, to the last drop of our ink. And truly this submission, which sometimes wheedles you into pity, as seldom decoys you into love, as the awkward cringing of an antiquated fop, as moneyless as he is ugly, affects an experienced fair one. Now we as little value your pity as a lover his mistresses, well satisfied that it is only a less uncivil way of dismissing us. But what if neither of these two ways will work upon you, of which doleful truth some of our playwrights stand so many living monuments? Why then, truly I think on no other way at present but blending the two into one. And, from this marriage of huffing and cringing, there will result a new kind of careless medley, which, perhaps, will work upon both sorts of readers, those who are to be hectored, and those whom we must creep to. At least, it is like to please by its novelty, and it will not be the first monster that has pleased you when regular nature could not do it. If uncommon worth, lively wit, and deep learning, wove into wholesome satire, a bold, good, and vast design admirably pursued, truth set out in its true light, and a method how to arrive to its oracle, can recommend a work, I am sure this has enough to please any reasonable man. The 3 books published some time since, which are in a manner an entire work, were kindly received. Yet, in the French, they come far short of these 2, which are also entire pieces. For the satire is all general here, much more obvious and consequently more entertaining. Even my long explanatory preface was not thought improper, though I was so far from being allowed time to make it methodical, that at first only a few pages were intended, yet as fast as they were printed I wrote on, till it proved at last like one of those towns built little at first, then enlarged, where you see promiscuously an odd variety of all sorts of irregular buildings. I hope the remarks I give now will not please less, for, as I have translated the work which they explain, I had more time to make them, though as little to write them. It would be needless to give here a large account of my performance, For, after all, you readers care no more for this or that apology or pretense of Mr. Translator, if the version does not please you, than we do for a blundering cook's excuse after he has spoiled a good dish in the dressing. Nor can the first pretend to much praise, besides that of giving his author's sense in its full extent, and copying his style, if it is to be copied, since he has no share in the invention or disposition of what he translates. Yet there was no small difficulty in doing Rabelais justice in that double respect. The obsolete words and turns of phrase, and dark subjects, often as darkly treated, make the sense hard to be understood even by a Frenchman, and it cannot be easy to give it the free, easy air of an original. For even what seems most common talk in one language is what is often the most difficult to be made so in another. And Horace's thoughts of comedy may be well applied to this. Creditor ex medio quia res arcessit, haber sudoris minimum, sed habet commodia tantum plus oneris, quanto venii minus. Far be it from me, for all this, to value myself upon hitting the words of cant in which my drolling author is so luxuriant. For though such words have stood me in good stead, I scarce can forbear thinking myself unhappy in having insensibly hoarded up so much gibberish and Billingsgate trash in my memory. Nor could I forbear asking of myself, as an Italian cardinal said on another account, 500 and high tu pigliato tant coglionary. Where the devil didst thou rake up all these fripperies? It was not less difficult to come up to the author's sublime expressions. Nor would I have attempted such a task, but that I was ambitious of giving a view of the most valuable work of the greatest genius of his age, to the machinas and best genius of this. For I am not overfond of so ungrateful a task as translating, and would rejoice to see less versions and more originals. So the latter were not as bad as many of the first are, through want of encouragement. Some indeed have deservedly gained esteem by translating, yet not many condescend to translate, but such as cannot invent, though to do the first well requires often as much genius as to do the latter. I wish, reader, thou mayest be as willing to do my author justice, as I have strove to do him right. Yet if thou art a brother of the quill, it is 10 to 1 thou art too much in love with thy own dear productions to admire those of one of thy trade. However, I know 3 or 4 who have not such a mighty opinion of themselves, but I'll not name them, lest I should be obliged to place myself among them. If thou art one of those who, though they never write, criticize everyone that does, avaunt, thou art a professed enemy of mankind and of thyself, who wilt never be pleased nor let anybody be so, and knowest no better way to fame than by striving to lessen that of others. Though wouldst thou write thou mightst be soon known, even by the butterwomen, and fly through the world in bandboxes. If thou art of the dissembling tribe, it is thy office to rail at those books which thou huggest in a corner. If thou art one of those eavesdroppers, who would have their moroseness be counted gravity, thou wilt condemn a mirth which thou art past relishing. And I know no other way to quit the score than by writing, as like enough I may something as dull or duller than thyself, if possible. If thou art one of those critics in dressing, those extemporaries of fortune, who, having lost a relation and got an estate, in an instant set up for wit and every extravagance, thou'lt either praise or discommend this book, according to the dictates of some less foolish than thyself, perhaps of one of those who, being lodged at the sign of the box and dice, will know better things than to recommend to thee a work which bids thee beware of his tricks. This book might teach thee to leave thy follies, but some will say it does not signify much to some fools whether they are so or not, for when was there a fool that thought himself one? If thou art one of those who would put themselves upon us for learned men in Greek and Hebrew, yet are mere blockheads in English, and patch together old pieces of the ancients to get themselves clothes out of them, thou art too severely mauled in this work to like it. Who then will? Some will cry. Nay, besides these, many societies that make a great figure in the world are reflected on in this book, which caused Rabelais to study to be dark, and even bedaub it with many loose expressions, that he might not be thought to have any other design than to droll, in a manner bewraying his book that his enemies might not bite it. Truly, though now the riddle is expounded, I would advise those who read it not to reflect on the author, lest he be thought to have been beforehand with them, and they be ranked among those who have nothing to show for their honesty but their money, nothing for their religion but their dissembling, or a fat benefice, nothing for their wit but their dressing, for their nobility but their title, for their gentility but their sword, for their courage but their huffing, for their preferment but their assurance, for their learning but their degrees, or for their gravity but their wrinkles or dullness. They had better laugh at one another here, as it is the custom of the world. Laughing is of all professions. The miser may hoard, the spendthrift squander, the politician plot, the lawyer wrangle, and the gamester cheat. Still their main design is to be able to laugh at one another. And here they may do it at a cheap and easy rate. After all, should this work fail to please the greater number of readers, I am sure it cannot miss being liked by those who are for witty mirth and a chirping bottle, though not by those solid sots who seem to have drudged all their youth long only that they might enjoy the sweet blessing of getting drunk every night in their old age. But those men of sense and honor who love truth and the good of mankind in general above all other things will undoubtedly countenance this work. I will not gravely insist upon its usefulness, having said enough of it in the preface, Matthew, Preface to Vol. I of Rabelais ed. 1694, to the first part. I will only add that as Homer in his Odyssey makes his hero wander 10 years through most parts of the then known world, so Rabelais, in a 3 months' voyage, makes Pantagruel take a view of almost all sorts of people and professions. With this difference, however, between the ancient mythologist and the modern, that while the Odyssey has been compared to a setting sun in respect to the Iliad's, Rabelais' last work, which is this voyage to the oracle of the bottle, by which he means truth, is justly thought his masterpiece, being wrote with more spirit, salt, and flame than the first part of his works. At near 70 years of age, his genius, far from being drained, seemed to have acquired fresh vigor and new graces the more it exerted itself, like those rivers which grow more deep, large, majestic, and useful by their course. Those who accuse the French of being as sparing of their wit, as lavish of their words, will find an Englishman in our author. I must confess, indeed, that my countrymen and other southern nations temper the one with the other in a manner as they do their wine with water, often just dashing the latter with a little of the first. Now here men love to drink their wine pure. Nay, sometimes it will not satisfy unless in its very quintessence, as in brandies, though an excess of this betrays want of sobriety as much as an excess of wit betrays a want of judgment. But I must conclude, lest I be justly taxed with wanting both. I will only add that as every language has its peculiar graces, seldom or never to be acquired by a foreigner, I cannot think I have given my author those of the English in every place. But as none compelled me to write, I fear to ask a pardon which yet the generous temper of this nation makes me hope to obtain. Albinus, a Roman, who had written in Greek, desired in his preface to be forgiven his faults of language. But Cato asked him in derision whether any had forced him to write in a tongue of which he was not an absolute master. Lucullus wrote a history in the same tongue, and said he had scattered some false Greek in it to let the world know it was the work of a Roman. I will not say as much of my writings, in which I study to be as little incorrect as the hurry of business and shortness of time will permit. But I may better say, as Tully did of the history of his consulship, which he also had written in Greek, that what errors may be found in the diction are crept in against my intent. Indeed, Livius, Andronicus, and Terence, the one a Greek, the other a Carthaginian, wrote successfully in Latin, and the latter is perhaps the most perfect model of the purity and urbanity of that tongue. But I ought not to hope for the success of those great men. Yet am I ambitious of being as subservient to the useful diversion of the ingenious of this nation as I can, which I have endeavored in this work, with hopes to attempt some greater tasks if ever I am happy enough to have more leisure. In the meantime, it will not displease me, if it is known that this is given by one who, though born and educated in France, has the love and veneration of a loyal subject for this nation. One who, by a fatality, which with many more made him say, nos patrium fugimus, et dulcia linquimus arva, is obliged to make the language of these happy regions as natural to him as he can, and thankfully say with the rest, under this Protestant government, Deus nobis hic otia fecit. Esteem myself a better Christian than they show themselves towards me, and if my life, writings, words, nay thoughts, betrayed to me one single spark of heresy, or I should in a detestable manner fall into the snares of the spirit of detraction, diabolos, who, by their means, raises such crimes against me. I would then, like the phoenix, gather dry wood, kindle a fire, and burn myself in the midst of it. You were then pleased to say to me that King Francis, of eternal memory, had been made sensible of those false accusations, and that having caused my books, mine, I say, because several, false and infamous, have been wickedly laid to me, to be carefully and distinctly read to him by the most learned and faithful anagnost in this kingdom, he had not found any passage suspicious, and that he abhorred a certain envious, ignorant, hypocritical informer, who grounded a mortal heresy on an N put instead of an M by the carelessness of the printers. As much was done by his son, our most gracious, virtuous, and blessed sovereign Henry, whom heaven long preserve, so that he granted you his royal privilege and particular protection for me against my slandering adversaries. You kindly condescended since to confirm me these happy news at Paris, and also lately, when you visited my Lord Cardinal du Bellay, who, for the benefit of his health after a lingering distemper, was retired to Saint Maur, that place, or rather paradise, of salubrity, serenity, conveniency, and all desirable country pleasures. Thus, my lord, under so glorious a patronage, I am emboldened once more to draw my pen, undaunted now and secure, with hopes that you will still prove to me, against the power of detraction, a second Gallic Hercules in learning, prudence, and eloquence, and a Lexicacos in virtue, power, and authority, you, of whom I may truly say what the wise monarch Solomon saith of Moses, that great prophet and captain of Israel, Ecclesiast. 45. A man fearing and loving God, who found favor in the sight of all flesh, well beloved both of God and man, whose memorial is blessed. God made him like to the glorious saints, and magnified him so, that his enemies stood in fear of him, and for him made wonders, made him glorious in the sight of kings, gave him a commandment for his people, and by him showed his light. He sanctified him in his faithfulness and meekness, and chose him out of all men. By him he made us to hear his voice, and caused by him the law of life and knowledge to be given. Accordingly, if I shall be so happy as to hear anyone commend those merry composures, they shall be adjured by me to be obliged and pay their thanks to you alone, as also to offer their prayers to heaven for the continuance and increase of your greatness, and to attribute no more to me than my humble and ready obedience to your commands. For by your most honorable encouragement you at once have inspired me with spirit and with invention. And without you, my heart had failed me, and the fountainhead of my animal spirits had been dry. May the Lord keep you in his blessed mercy. My lord, your most humble and most devoted servant, François Rabelais, physician. Paris, this 28th of January, 1552. The fourth book. Chapter 4I. How Pantagruel went to sea to visit the oracle of Bacbuc, alias the Holy Bottle. In the month of June, on Vesta's holiday, the very numerical day on which Brutus, conquering Spain, taught its strutting dons to truckle under him, and that niggardly miser Crassus was routed and knocked on the head by the Parthians, Pantagruel took his leave of the good Gargantua, his royal father. The old gentleman, according to the laudable custom of the primitive Christians, devoutly prayed for the happy voyage of his son and his whole company, and then they took shipping at the port of Thalassa. Pantagruel had with him Panurge, Friar John des Entomiers, alias of the Funnels, Epistamen, Gymnast, Eusthenes, Rhizotome, Carpelin, cum multis aliis, his ancient servants and domestics. Also Xenomanes, the great traveler, who had crossed so many dangerous roads, dikes, ponds, seas, and so forth, and was come some time before, having been sent for by Panurge. For certain good causes and considerations him thereunto moving, he had left with Gargantua, and marked out, in his great and universal hydrographical chart, the course which they were to steer to visit the oracle of the Holy Bottle Bacbuc. The number of ships were such as I described in the third book, convoyed by a like number of triremes, men of war, galleons, and feluccas, well-rigged, caulked, and stored with a good quantity of Pantagruelian. All the officers, droghermen, pilots, captains, mates, boatswains, midshipmen, quartermasters, and sailors met in the Thalamge, Pantagruel's principal flagship, which had in her stern for her ensign a huge large bottle, half silver well polished, the other half gold enameled with carnation. whereby it was easy to guess that white and red were the colors of the noble travelers, and that they went for the word of the bottle. On the stern of the second was a lantern like those of the ancients, industriously made with diaphanous stone, implying that they were to pass by Lanternland. The third ship had for her device a fine deep china ewer. The fourth, a double-handed jar of gold, much like an ancient urn. The fifth, a famous can made of sperm of emerald. The sixth, a monk's mumping bottle made of the four metals together. The seventh, an ebony funnel, all embossed and wrought with gold after the Toccic manner. The eighth, an ivy goblet very precious, inlaid with gold. The ninth, a cup of fine Abras gold. The 10th, a tumbler of aromatic agalock, you call it lignum aloes, edged with Cyprian gold, after the Asmine make. The 11th, a golden vine tub of mosaic work. The 12th, a runlet of unpolished gold, covered with a small vine of large Indian pearl of topiarian work. Insomuch that there was not a man, however in the dumps, musty, sour-looked, or melancholic he were, not even excepting that blubbering whiner Heraclitus, had he been there, but seeing this noble convoy of ships and their devices, must have been seized with present gladness of heart, and, smiling at the conceit, have said that the travelers were all honest topers, true pitchermen, and have judged by a most sure prognostication that their voyage, both outward and homeward bound, would be performed in mirth and perfect health. In the Thalamge, where was the general meeting, Pantagruel made a short but sweet exhortation, wholly backed with authorities from Scripture upon navigation, which being ended, with an audible voice prayers were said in the presence and hearing of all the burghers of Thalassa, who had flocked to the mole to see them take shipping. After the prayers was melodiously sung a psalm of the holy King David, which begins, when Israel went out of Egypt, and that being ended, tables were placed upon deck, and a feast speedily served up. The Thalassians, who had also borne a chorus in the psalm, caused store of belly timber to be brought out of their houses. All drank to them, they drank to all, which was the cause that none of the whole company gave up what they had eaten, nor were seasick, with a pain at the head and stomach, which inconveniency they could not so easily have prevented by drinking, for some time before, salt water, either alone or mixed with wine. Using quinces, citron peel, juice of pomegranates, sourish sweetmeats, fasting a long time, covering their stomachs with paper, or following such other idle remedies as foolish physicians prescribe to those that go to sea. Having often renewed their tipplings, each mother's son retired on board his own ship, and set sail all so fast with a merry gale at southeast, to which point of the compass the chief pilot, James Brayer by name, had shaped his course, and fixed all things accordingly. Foreseeing that the oracle of the holy bottle lay near Cathay, in the upper India, his advice, and that of Xenomanes also, was not to steer the course which the Portuguese use, while sailing through the torrid zone, and Cape Bonasperanza, at the south point of Africa, beyond the equinoctial line, and losing sight of the northern pole, their guide, they make a prodigious long voyage. But rather to keep as near the parallel of the said India as possible, and to tack to the westward of the said pole, so that winding under the north, they might find themselves in the latitude of the port of Olone, without coming nearer it for fear of being shut up in the frozen sea. Whereas, following this canonical turn, by the said parallel, they must have that on the right to the eastward, which at their departure was on their left. This proved a much shorter cut, for without shipwreck, danger, or loss of men, with uninterrupted good weather, except one day near the island of the Macrians, they performed in less than 4 months the voyage of Upper India, which the Portuguese, with 1,000 inconveniences and innumerable dangers, can hardly complete in 3 years. And it is my opinion, with submission to better judgments, that this course was perhaps steered by those Indians who sailed to Germany, and were honorably received by the king of the Swedes, while Quintus Metellus Celer was proconsul of the Gauls, as Cornelius Nepos, Pomponius Mela, and Pliny after them tell us. Chapter 4.2. How Pantagruel bought many rarities in the island of Metamathe. That day and the 2 following they neither discovered land nor anything new, for they had formerly sailed that way. But on the 4th they made an island called Metamathe, of a fine and delightful prospect, by reason of the vast number of lighthouses and high marble towers in its circuit, which is not less than that of Canada, sick. Pantagruel, inquiring who governed there, heard that it was King Philophanes, absent at that time upon account of the marriage of his brother Philothemon with the infanta of the kingdom of Engis. Hearing this, he went ashore in the harbor, and while every ship's crew watered, passed his time in viewing divers pictures, pieces of tapestry, animals, fishes, birds, and other exotic and foreign merchandises, which were along the walks of the mole and in the markets of the port. For it was the third day of the great and famous fair of the place, to which the chief merchants of Africa and Asia resorted. Out of these Friar John bought him 2 rare pictures, in one of which the face of a man that brings in an appeal was drawn to the life, and in the other a servant that wants a master, with every needful particular, action, countenance, look, gait, feature, and deportment, being an original by Master Charles Charmois, principal painter to King Megistus, and he paid for them in the court fashion, with conge and grimace. Panurge bought a large picture, copied and done from the needlework formerly wrought by Philomela, showing to her sister Progny how her brother-in-law Tereus had by force handselled her copyhold, and then cut out her tongue that she might not, as women will, tell tales. I vow and swear by the handle of my paper lantern that it was a gallant, a mirific, nay, a most admirable piece. Nor do you think, I pray you, that in it was the picture of a man playing the beast with 2 backs with a female. This had been too silly and gross. No, it was another guy's thing, and much plainer. You may, if you please, see it at the Leam, on the left hand as you go into the high gallery. Epistemon bought another, wherein were painted to the life the ideas of Plato and the atoms of Epicurus. Rhizotome purchased another, wherein Echo was drawn to the life. Pantagruel caused to be bought, by Gymnast, the life and deeds of Achilles in 78 pieces of tapestry, 4 fathom long and 3 fathom broad, all of Phrygian silk, embossed with gold and silver, the work beginning at the nuptials of Peleus and Thetis, continuing to the birth of Achilles. His youth described by Statius Papinius, his warlike achievements celebrated by Homer, his death and obsequies written by Ovid and Quintus Calaber, and ending at the appearance of his ghost and Polyxena's sacrifice, rehearsed by Euripides. He also caused to be bought 3 fine young unicorns, one of them a male of a chestnut color and 2 gray dappled females, also a tarand, whom he bought of a Scythian of the Gelones country. A tarand is an animal as big as a bullock, having a head like a stag or a little bigger, 2 stately horns with large branches, cloven feet, hair long like that of a furred muscovite, I mean a bear, and a skin almost as hard as steel armor. The Scythian said that there are but few tarands to be found in Scythia, because it varieth its color according to the diversity of the places where it grazes and abides, and represents the color of the grass, plants, trees, shrubs, flowers, meadows, rocks, and generally of all things near which it comes. It hath this common with the sea pulp, or polypus, with the those, with the wolves of India, and with the chameleon, which is a kind of a lizard so wonderful that Democritus hath written a whole book of its figure and anatomy, as also of its virtue and propriety in magic. This I can affirm, that I have seen it change its color, not only at the approach of things that have a color, but by its own voluntary impulse, according to its fear or other affections. As, for example, upon a green carpet I have certainly seen it become green, but having remained there some time, it turned yellow, blue, tanned, and purple in course, in the same manner as you see a turkey-cock's comb change color according to its passions. But what we find most surprising in this tarand is that not only its face and skin, but also its hair could take whatever color was about it. Near Panurge, with his kersey coat, its hair used to turn gray. Near Pantagruel, with his scarlet mantle, its hair and skin grew red. Near the pilot, dressed after the fashion of the Isiacs of Anubis in Egypt, its hair seemed all white, which 2 last colors the chameleons cannot borrow. When the creature was free from any fear or affection, the color of its hair was just such as you see that of the asses of Meung. Chapter 4.3. How Pantagruel received a letter from his father Gargantua, and of the strange way to have speedy news from far distant places. While Pantagruel was taken up with the purchase of those foreign animals, the noise of 10 guns and culverins, together with a loud and joyful cheer of all the fleet, was heard from the mole. Pantagruel looked towards the haven, and perceived that this was occasioned by the arrival of one of his father Gargantua's celoses, or advice boats, named the Chelidonia, because on the stern of it was carved in Corinthian brass a sea swallow, which is a fish as large as a dare fish of Loire, all flesh, without scale, with cartilaginous wings, like a bat's, very long and broad, by the means of which I have seen them fly about 3 fathom above water, about a bowshot. At Marseilles, 'tis called Lendl. And indeed that ship was as light as a swallow, so that it rather seemed to fly on the sea than to sail. Malicorne, Gargantua's esquire carver, was come in her, being sent expressly by his master to have an account of his son's health and circumstances, and to bring him credentials. When Malicorne had saluted Pantagruel, before the prince opened the letters, the first thing he said to him was, "Have you here the gozal, the heavenly messenger?" "Yes, sir," said he, "here it is swaddled up in this basket." It was a gray pigeon, taken out of Gargantua's dove house, whose young ones were just hatched when the advice boat was going off. If any ill fortune had befallen Pantagruel, he would have fastened some black ribbon to his feet. But because all things had succeeded happily hitherto, having caused it to be undressed, he tied to its feet a white ribbon, and without any further delay let it loose. The pigeon presently flew away, cutting the air with an incredible speed, as you know that there is no flight like a pigeon, especially when it hath eggs or young ones, through the extreme care which nature hath fixed in it to relieve and be with its young. Insomuch that in less than 2 hours it compassed in the air the long tract which the advice boat, with all her diligence, with oars and sails, and a fair wind, could not go through in less than 3 days and 3 nights, and was seen as it went into the dove house in its nest. Whereupon Gargantua, hearing that it had the white ribbon on, was joyful and secure of his son's welfare. This was the custom of the noble Gargantua and Pantagruel when they would have speedy news of something of great concern, as the event of some battle, either by sea or land, the surrendering or holding out of some strong place, the determination of some difference of moment, the safe or unhappy delivery of some queen or great lady, the death or recovery of their sick friends or allies, and so forth. They used to take the gozal, and had it carried from one to another by the post, to the places whence they desired to have news. The gozal, bearing either a black or white ribbon, according to the occurrences and accidents, used to remove their doubts at its return, making in the space of 1 hour more way through the air than 30 postboys could have done in 1 natural day. May not this be said to redeem and gain time with a vengeance, think you? For the like service, therefore, you may believe as a most true thing that in the dove houses of their farms there were to be found all the year long store of pigeons hatching eggs or rearing their young, which may be easily done in aviaries and volaries by the help of saltpeter and the sacred herb vervain. The gozal being let fly, Pantagruel perused his father Gargantua's letter, the contents of which were as followeth. My dearest son, the affection that naturally a father bears a beloved son is so much increased in me by reflecting on the particular gifts, which by the divine goodness have been heaped on thee, that since thy departure it hath often banished all other thoughts out of my mind, leaving my heart wholly possessed with fear lest some misfortune has attended thy voyage, for thou knowest that fear was ever the attendant of true and sincere love. Now because, as Hesiod saith, a good beginning of anything is the half of it, or well begun's half done, according to the old saying. To free my mind from this anxiety, I have expressly dispatched Malicorne, that he may give me a true account of thy health at the beginning of thy voyage. For if it be good, and such as I wish it, I shall easily foresee the rest. I have met with some diverting books, which the bearer will deliver thee. Thou mayest read them when thou wantest to unbend and ease thy mind from thy better studies. He will also give thee at large the news at court. The peace of the Lord be with thee. Remember me to Panurge, Friar John, Epistemon, Xenomanes, Gymnast, and thy other principal domestics. Dated at our paternal seat, this 13th day of June. Thy father and friend, Gargantua. Chapter 4.4. How Pantagruel writ to his father Gargantua, and sent him several curiosities. Pantagruel, having perused the letter, had a long conference with the esquire Malicorne, insomuch that Panurge, at last interrupting them, asked him, Pray, sir, when do you design to drink? When shall we drink? When shall the worshipful esquire drink? What a devil! Have you not talked long enough to drink? "It is a good motion," answered Pantagruel. "Go, get us something ready at the next inn. I think tea's the centaur." In the meantime, he writ to Gargantua as followeth, to be sent by the aforesaid esquire. Most gracious father, as our senses and animal faculties are more discomposed at the news of events unexpected, though desired, even to an immediate dissolution of the soul from the body, than if those accidents had been foreseen, so the coming of Malicorn hath much surprised and disordered me. For I had no hopes to see any of your servants, or to hear from you, before I had finished our voyage, and contented myself with the dear remembrance of your august majesty, deeply impressed in the hindmost ventricle of my brain, often representing you to my mind. But since you have made me happy beyond expectation by the perusal of your gracious letter, and the faith I have in your esquire hath revived my spirits by the news of your welfare, I am as it were compelled to do what formerly I did freely, that is, first to praise the blessed Redeemer, who by his divine goodness preserves you in this long enjoyment of perfect health, then to return you eternal thanks for the fervent affection which you have for me, your most humble son and unprofitable servant. Formerly a Roman, named Furnius, said to Augustus, who had received his father into favor, and pardoned him after he had sided with Antony, that by that action the emperor had reduced him to this extremity, that for want of power to be grateful, both while he lived and after it, he should be obliged to be taxed with ingratitude. So I may say that the excess of your fatherly affection drives me into such a strait, that I shall be forced to live and die ungrateful, unless that crime be redressed by the sentence of the Stoics, who say that there are 3 parts in a benefit, the one of the giver, the other of the receiver, the third of the remunerator, and that the receiver rewards the giver when he freely receives the benefit and always remembers it. As, on the contrary, that man is most ungrateful who despises and forgets a benefit. Therefore, being overwhelmed with infinite favors, all proceeding from your extreme goodness, and on the other side wholly incapable of making the smallest return, I hope at least to free myself from the imputation of ingratitude, since they can never be blotted out of my mind. And my tongue shall never cease to own that to thank you as I ought transcends my capacity. As for us, I have this assurance in the Lord's mercy and help, that the end of our voyage will be answerable to its beginning, and so it will be entirely performed in health and mirth. I will not fail to set down in a journal a full account of our navigation, that at our return you may have an exact relation of the whole. I have found here a Scythian tarand, an animal strange and wonderful for the variations of color on its skin and hair, according to the distinction of neighboring things. It is as tractable and easily kept as a lamb. Be pleased to accept of it. I also send you 3 young unicorns, which are the tamest of creatures. I have conferred with the esquire, and taught him how they must be fed. These cannot graze on the ground by reason of the long horn on their forehead, but are forced to browse on fruit trees, or on proper racks, or to be fed by hand, with herbs, sheaves, apples, pears, barley, rye, and other fruits and roots, being placed before them. I am amazed that ancient writers should report them to be so wild, furious, and dangerous, and never seen alive. Far from it, you will find that they are the mildest things in the world, provided they are not maliciously offended. Likewise, I send you the life and deeds of Achilles in curious tapestry, assuring you whatever rarities of animals, plants, birds, or precious stones, and others I shall be able to find and purchase in our travels, shall be brought to you, God willing, whom I beseech by his blessed grace to preserve you. From Metamothe, this 15th of June. Panurge, Friar John, Epistemon, Xenomanes, Gymnast, Eusthenes, Rhizotome, and Carpelin, having most humbly kissed your hand, return your salute 1,000 times. Your most dutiful son and servant, Pantagruel. While Pantagruel was writing this letter, Malicorn was made welcome by all with 1,000 goodly good morrows and how d'ye, s. They clung about him so that I cannot tell you how much they made of him, how many humble services, how many from my love and to my love were sent with him. Pantagruel, having writ his letters, sat down at table with him, and afterwards presented him with a large chain of gold, weighing 800 crowns, between whose septenary links some large diamonds, rubies, emeralds, turquoise stones, and unions were alternately set in. To each of his bark's crew he ordered to be given 500 crowns. To Gargantua, his father, he sent the tarrant covered with a cloth of satin, brocaded with gold, and the tapestry containing the life and deeds of Achilles, with the 3 unicorns in friezed cloth of gold trappings. And so they left Metamothi Malicorn to return to Gargantua, Pantagruel to proceed in his voyage, during which Epistemon read to him the books which the esquire had brought, and because he found them jovial and pleasant, I shall give you an account of them, if you earnestly desire it. Chapter 4.5. How Pantagruel met a ship, with passengers returning from Lanternland. On the 5th day, we began already to wind by little and little about the pole. Going still farther from the equinoctial line, we discovered a merchantman to the windward of us. The joy for this was not small on both sides, we in hopes to hear news from sea, and those in the merchantman from land. So we bore upon and coming up with them we hailed them, and finding them to be Frenchmen of Zaintonge, backed our sails and lay by to talk to them. Pantagruel heard that they came from Lanternland, which added to his joy and that of the whole fleet. We inquired about the state of that country, and the way of living of the lanterns, and were told that about the latter end of the following July was the time prefixed for the meeting of the general chapter of the lanterns, and that if we arrived there at that time, as we might easily, we should see a handsome, honorable, and jolly company of lanterns, and that great preparations were making, as if they intended to lanternize there to the purpose. We were told also that if we touched at the great kingdom of Jebarim, we should be honorably received and treated by the sovereign of that country, King Ohabe, who, as well as all his subjects, speaks Touraine French. While we were listening to these news, Panurge fell out with one ding-dong, a drover or sheep merchant of Tailleberg. The occasion of the fray was thus. This same ding-dong, seeing Panurge without a codpiece, with his spectacles fastened to his cap, said to one of his comrades, "Prithee look, is there not a fine medal of a cuckold?" Panurge, by reason of his spectacles, as you may well think, heard more plainly by half with his ears than usually, which caused him, hearing this, to say to the saucy dealer in mutton, in a kind of a pet, "How the devil should I be one of the hornified fraternity, since I am not yet a brother of the marriage noose, as thou art, as I guess by thy ill-favored phiz?" "Yea, verily," quoth the grazier, "I am married, and would not be otherwise for all the pairs of spectacles in Europe. Nay, not for all the magnifying gimcracks in Africa. For I have got me the cleverest, prettiest, handsomest, properest, neatest, tightest, honestest, and soberest piece of woman's flesh for my wife that is in all the whole country of Zaintonge. I'll say that for her, and a fart for all the rest. I bring her home a fine 11-inch long branch of red coral for her Christmas box. What hast thou to do with it? What's that to thee? Who art thou? Whence comest thou, O dark lantern of Antichrist? Answer, if thou art of God. I ask thee by the way of question, said Panurge to him very seriously, if with the consent and countenance of all the elements I had jingum-bobbed, codpieced, and thump-them-priggled tickletwiddled thy so clever, so pretty, so handsome, so proper, so neat, so tight, so honest, and so sober female importance, insomuch that the stiff deity that has no forecast, Priapus, who dwells here at liberty, all subjection of fastened codpieces or bolts, bars, and locks abdicated, remained sticking in her natural Christmas box in such a lamentable manner that it were never to come out, but eternally should stick there, unless thou didst pull it out with thy teeth, what wouldst thou do? Wouldst thou everlastingly leave it there, or wouldst thou pluck it out with thy grinders? Answer me, O thou ram of Mahomet, since thou art one of the devil's gang. I would, replied the sheepmonger, take thee such a woundy cut on the spectacle-bearing lug of thine with my trusty bilbo, as would smite thee dead as a herring. Thus, having taken Pepper in the nose, he was lugging out his sword, but, alas, cursed cows have short horns, it stuck in the scabbard. As you know that at sea cold iron will easily take rust by reason of the excessive and nitrous moisture. Panurge, so smitten with terror that his heart sunk down to his midriff, scoured off to Pantagruel for help. But Friar John laid hand on his flashing scimitar that was new ground, and would certainly have dispatched Ding-Dong to rights, had not the skipper and some of his passengers beseeched Pantagruel not to suffer such an outrage to be committed on board his ship. So the matter was made up, and Panurge and his antagonist shaked fists, and drank in course to one another in token of a perfect reconciliation. Chapter 4.6. How, the fray being over, Panurge cheapened one of Ding Dong's sheep. This quarrel being hushed, Panurge tipped the wink upon Epistamen and Friar John, and taking them aside, "Stand at some distance out of the way," said he, "and take your share of the following scene of mirth. You shall have rare sport anon, if my cake be not dough, and my plot do but take." Then addressing himself to the drover, he took off to him a bumper of good lantern wine. The other pledged him briskly and courteously. This done, Panurge earnestly entreated him to sell him one of his sheep. But the other answered him, "Is it come to that, friend and neighbor? Would you put tricks upon travelers? Alas, how finely you love to play upon poor folk. Nay, you seem a rare chapman, that's the truth on't. Oh, what a mighty sheep merchant you are. In good faith, you look liker one of the diving trade than a buyer of sheep. Adzookers, what a blessing it would be to have one's purse well lined with chink near your worship at a tripe house when it begins to thaw. Humph, humph, did not we know you well, you might serve one a slippery trick. Pray do but see, good people, what a mighty conjurer the fellow would be reckoned." "Patience," said Panurge, "but waiving that, be so kind as to sell me one of your sheep." "Come, how much?" "What do you mean, master of mind?" Answered the other, "They are long-wool sheep. From these did Jason take his golden fleece. The gold of the house of Burgundy was drawn from them. Zwoons, man, they are oriental sheep, topping sheep, fatted sheep, sheep of quality." "Be it so," said Panurge, "but sell me one of them, I beseech you, and that for a cause, paying you ready money upon the nail, in good and lawful occidental current cash." "Wilt say how much?" "Friend, neighbor," answered the seller of mut, "hark ye me a little on the ear." Panurge, "On which side you please, I hear you." Ding Dong, "You are going to Lanternland, they say." Panurge, "Yea, verily." Ding Dong, "To see fashions." Panurge, "Even so." Ding Dong, "And be merry." Panurge, "And be merry." Ding Dong, "Your name is, as I take it, Robin Mutt." Panurge, "As you please for that, sweet sir." Ding Dong, "Nay, without offense." Panurge, "So I would have it." Ding Dong, "You are, as I take it, the king's jester, aren't you?" Panurge, "Eyes, anything." Ding Dong, "Give me your hand, Humph, Humph, you go to see fashions. You are the king's jester, your name is Robin Mutt. Do you see this same ram? His name, too, is Robin. Here, Robin, Robin, Robin. Bia, bia, bia. Hath he not a rare voice?" Panurge, "Ay, marry has he, a very fine and harmonious voice." Ding Dong, "Well, this bargain shall be made between you and me, friend and neighbor. We will get a pair of scales, then you Robin Mutton shall be put into one of them, and tup Robin into the other. Now I will hold you a peck of bush oysters, that in weight, value, and price he shall outdo you, and you shall be found light in the very numerical manner as when you shall be hanged and suspended." "Patience," said Panurge, "but you would do much for me and your whole posterity if you would chaffer with me for him or some other of his inferiors. I beg it of you, good your worship, be so kind." "Hark ye, friend of mine," answered the other, "with the fleece of these your fine Rowan cloth is to be made, your Leominster superfine wool is mine arse to it, mere flock in comparison. Of their skins the best cordovan will be made, which shall be sold for Turkey and Montelimart, or for Spanish leather at least. Of the guts shall be made fiddle and harp strings, that will sell as dear as if they came from Munichen or Aquileia. What do you think on't, ha?" "If you please, sell me one of them," said Panurge, "and I will be yours forever. Look, here's ready cash." "What's the price?" This he said, exhibiting his purse stuffed with new Henricuses.